She stood at the edge of the town square, the glow of lanterns flickering against the autumn night sky, yet none of that light seemed to touch her. Whispers followed her wherever she went, sharp and cruel, branding her as something less than human, a fallen woman. Faces she had once known since childhood now turned away coldly, refusing her even a kind word. She clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, not against the chill of the evening, but against the sting of being unwelcome in her own town. Tonight was the harvest dance, a celebration of joy, music, and fellowship. But for her, it was only another reminder of how far she had fallen in their eyes. She had made mistakes, yes, but none as grave as the stories told in hushed tones. Rumors had grown like weeds around her name, twisting the truth until no one cared what was real anymore. A man she once trusted had left her, and in his absence, she carried not only her sorrow but the burden of shame the town laid upon her shoulders. It didn't matter that she worked harder than most, that she took care of her mother until the old woman's last breath. The label had been set, carved into her reputation like a scar, and it followed her into every corner of her life. The harvest dance was the kind of event she used to dream of as a girl. The fiddles, the laughter, the swish of dresses across the wooden floor, it was supposed to be magic. Now she stood just outside its glow, watching through the windows as couples spun under the golden lanterns. The music drifted through the air, wrapping around her like a song she no longer belonged to. She told herself she would only watch a moment, then turn back to the solitude of her small cabin. But her feet didn't move. Something inside her longed for even a sliver of belonging, even just a taste of what had been taken from her. Inside, the men leaned against the walls, their boots tapping to the rhythm, while the women's laughter rang out like bells. No one thought to look outside, no one noticed her standing there in the shadows. But one pair of eyes did, a man leaning near the fire, tall, with a quiet strength about him. He saw her, truly saw her, through the glass. His brow furrowed at the way the others danced and laughed without sparing her a thought. Without hesitation, he stepped away from the crowd, his boots clicking against the wooden floor, and walked out into the night. She startled when he appeared, unsure whether he had come to scorn her or to push her further into the darkness. But his eyes held no judgment. They held only a warmth she hadn't seen in years. "Why don't you come inside?" he asked gently, his voice carrying over the music. She shook her head, clutching her shawl tighter, afraid of the stares, the whispers that would follow. He didn't press her. Instead, he simply extended his hand, an unspoken invitation, letting her see that choice still belonged to her. For the first time in a long time, someone offered her dignity instead of disgrace. Her heart pounded as she stared at his hand, torn between fear and longing. Memories of laughter, of being twirled across a dance floor long ago, flickered like ghosts in her mind. She wanted to believe this was real, that she wasn't invisible, that maybe she was still worthy of joy. And slowly, trembling, she placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, warm, grounding her in the present. Together, they stepped into the glow of the lanterns, and all eyes turned to them as though the music itself had paused. The whispers came quickly, sharp and biting. Women clutched their husbands' arms, men muttered under their breath. The word, fallen, slipped from one corner of the room like poison spreading through air. She felt her knees weaken, the sting of tears pressing hot against her eyes. But the man at her side held her hand firmly, as if to remind her that she wasn't standing alone anymore. "Ignore them," he whispered, his voice strong, unshaken. "They don't know your heart. But I do." The fiddler hesitated, bow hanging in the air, until the man gave a nod, and the music began again. Slowly, he guided her to the center of the floor. The crowd parted, some reluctantly, some with curiosity, and the two of them began to dance. At first her steps were unsure, her body stiff with self-consciousness. But his patience never wavered, his smile never dimmed. With each turn, with each step, she began to remember the rhythm, to feel the music awaken something inside her that had long been buried. As they moved together, the whispers softened, fading beneath the sound of fiddles and laughter. A few faces began to soften as well, eyes lingering not on the shame they thought they saw, but on the light returning to her expression. It was as though, in the simple act of dancing, she began to reclaim the pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of joy blooming inside her chest, fragile yet undeniable. The man's name was Samuel, though she had known him only from a distance before tonight. A farmer, quiet and steady, he was not one for gossip or noise. He believed in what he saw with his own eyes, and what he saw now was a woman who had endured more than most and still stood with dignity. As they danced, he spoke softly to her, not of her past, but of her courage, her kindness, her strength. Each word was a balm, soothing the wounds that cruel whispers had carved into her spirit. When the music ended, a silence settled over the hall. The crowd waited, watching, as though expecting her to bow her head and flee in shame. Instead, she stood tall, Samuel's hand still clasping hers. For the first time, she looked around the room not with fear, but with defiance. She met their gazes and let them see that she would no longer hide, no longer shrink away. She was more than their label, more than their gossip, more than the shadows they had cast upon her life. The murmurs rose again, but this time they were different. A few voices softened, hesitant, questioning. Children giggled, clapping their hands, urging the fiddler to play another tune. The tension cracked, giving way to curiosity, and slowly, reluctantly, the dance resumed. Though some still turned their backs, others began to see her not as a stain upon their gathering, but as a woman brave enough to stand in the light despite all odds. As the night went on, Samuel never left her side. They danced again, and again, laughter spilling from her lips as though it had been waiting years to be free. The room no longer felt so hostile, the lanterns no longer so distant. For a few precious hours, she belonged once more, not because the town had given her permission, but because she had claimed her place with courage and grace. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of apples and hay. When the dance finally ended, Samuel walked her to the edge of the square. "They'll talk," she said quietly, her smile fading. "They always talk." He squeezed her hand, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Let them. What they say doesn't change who you are. And it won't change how I see you." His words wrapped around her like a promise, one she hadn't dared hope for until tonight. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a heart that had long been starved of kindness finally being nourished again. She looked at Samuel and saw not a rescuer, but a partner, someone willing to stand with her, to believe in her when no one else would. The ache of loneliness that had haunted her began to lift, replaced by the fragile, steady glow of hope. The weeks that followed were not easy. The town still whispered, still judged, but now she walked through the streets with her head held higher. Samuel was often by her side, his quiet presence a shield against their cruelty. Slowly, ever so slowly, a few neighbors began to soften, their curiosity outweighing their malice. They saw her kindness in action, the way she helped those in need without bitterness, the way she carried herself with quiet strength. Hearts that had once closed to her began to open, one by one. It was not the dance itself that changed everything, but the courage she found that night, the courage to step into the light despite the weight of her past. She began to realize that the power to define herself had never truly belonged to the town. It had always been hers. And though Samuel's love had lit the spark, it was her own resilience that kept it burning. Seasons passed, and the harvest dance returned again. This time, she did not linger in the shadows. She walked into the hall with her chin lifted, her eyes bright, her hand once more in Samuel's. The whispers still rose, but they no longer had the power to wound her. She had discovered something stronger than shame, stronger than judgment, she had discovered her worth. When she twirled beneath the lanterns once more, laughter spilling from her lips, the crowd saw not a fallen woman, but a woman who had risen. And though some would never change, many did, their hearts shifting with the rhythm of her courage. The town might have once shunned her, but she no longer lived for their acceptance. She lived for herself, for her heart, for the joy that had finally found its way home. Her story became more than whispers in a small town. It became a quiet lesson, passed through the years, reminding others that compassion can heal where judgment only wounds. That courage can shine even in the darkest corners. And that sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to see the truth in another's heart to change a life forever. The woman who had once stood in the shadows now danced in the light, unashamed and unbroken. And in her heart, she carried the lesson that love, true love, untainted by gossip or fear, has the power to redeem, to restore, and to remind us all that no one has ever truly fallen if they find the strength to rise again.